Hey guys, tonight we dive into the brutal reality of medieval food, or rather, the lack of it. From moldy bread that could break your teeth to mysterious meat that might kill you faster than starvation, this story is disturbing, eye-opening, and utterly brutal, a defining moment in understanding how our ancestors survived against impossible odds. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what you think about modern food waste, after hearing how medieval people struggled for every morsel. Now, let's begin. The first sensation that greets you isn't the cold seeping through the thin walls of your wattle and daub hut. It isn't the ache in your bones from sleeping on a straw-filled sack that's more dust than cushion. No, the first thing you feel as consciousness slowly returns is the hollow, gnawing pain in your stomach. It's a familiar companion, this hunger, as reliable as the sunrise and just as inescapable. Your eyes haven't even opened yet, but already your body is reminding you of its most basic need. The emptiness feels like a living thing clawing at your insides, demanding attention. You've learned to live with this feeling, of course. Everyone in your village has. It's as much a part of medieval life as mud and misery. The air in your small dwelling is thick with smoke from the central fire that never quite goes out. It mingles with other scents that assault your nostrils as you finally open your eyes to the dim morning light filtering through the cracks in the walls. There's the musty smell of damp thatch overhead, threatening to drip its special blend of rotten rainwater onto everything below. The sour stench of unwashed bodies, yours included, permeates every corner. But underneath it all, barely detectable yet impossible to ignore, is the smell of decay, food spoiling. Always food spoiling somewhere. You push yourself up from your sleeping spot, noting how your family members are still huddled together for warmth. The children's faces, even in sleep, show the telltale signs of chronic hunger, the hollow cheeks, the pallid skin stretched tight over prominent bones. Your spouse stirs slightly, and you catch a glimpse of teeth already beginning to loosen from malnutrition. You're probably not much better off yourself. The morning ritual begins, as it does every day, with the assessment of what little food remains. You make your way to the corner where your meager supplies are kept, trying not to wake the others. Hope, that dangerous emotion, flickers briefly in your chest. Perhaps today will be different. Perhaps today there will be something more than. But no. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you see exactly what you expected to see. The remains of yesterday's bread, if you can call it bread, sits wrapped in a piece of rough cloth. Even from here, you can see the spots of blue-green mold beginning to form on one corner. Your stomach, rather than being repulsed, growls louder. At the sight, mold is just extra flavor at this point. You've eaten far worse and been grateful for it. Beside the bread, a clay pot contains the last of the weak ale. You lift the lid carefully, knowing that sometimes creatures find their way inside during the night. No rats this time, thank God, though you can see the telltale droppings near the food stores. They're getting bolder as winter approaches, these rats. Sometimes you wonder who's hungrier, you or them. It's a competition nobody wins. The ale is thick and sour, with bits of sediment floating on top. You can smell the yeast and the slight vinegar tang that tells you it's on the verge of going bad. But bad ale is still safer than water, and you learned that lesson the hard way when your youngest child. No, you don't think about that. Not this early in the morning. The memories of violent illness and fever are pushed down, locked away with all the other tragedies that mark life in these times. You tear off a piece of the bread, noting how your jaw already aches in anticipation of the work ahead. This isn't the soft, white manchette bread that graces the Lord's table. This is peasant bread, dark and dense, made from whatever grain could be scraped together, rye, barley, sometimes even ground peas or beans when the harvest is particularly bad. You've found stones in it before, small ones that escaped the miller's notice or were perhaps added intentionally to increase the weight. Last month, your neighbor broke a tooth on such a stone. The tooth turned black within days, and the poison, from it spread to his jaw. He lasted to weeks before the fever took him down as you bite down. The bread fights back. It's stale enough to use as a weapon, and you have to soak it in the ale just to make it chewable. The taste is, well, taste is a luxury you've long since stopped expecting. It's sour and bitter, with an earthiness that comes from grain that was stored to long in damp conditions. There's a grittiness to it too, from the millstone grit that inevitably makes its way into every loaf. You chew slowly, methodically, knowing that this might be all you get until evening. The sound of your chewing seems impossibly loud in the quiet morning. Crunch, grind, swallow, repeat. Each bite is an effort, each swallow a small victory against the bread's determination to remain whole. Your teeth, the ones you still have, protest with each movement. You've learned to favor the left side of your mouth where the teeth are stronger, saving the loose ones on the right for softer fare. Not that soft food is often an option. As you eat, you become aware of other sounds beginning to fill the morning air. Through the thin walls, you can hear your neighbors stirring. The sound of coughing, always coughing in the morning as bodies try to expel the night's accumulation of smoke and damp. Someone is retching. The morning sickness of pregnancy, or perhaps just the revolt of an empty stomach, forced to process spoiled food. A baby cries, the thin, weak wail of a child who knows only hunger. The church bell tolls in the distance, calling the faithful to morning prayers. Your stomach clenches, not from devotion, but from the knowledge that prayer, while food for the soul, does nothing for the empty belly. Still, you'll go. Everyone goes. It's expected. And drawing the wrong kind of attention from the church is just as dangerous as starving. You take another sip of ale, feeling it burn slightly as it goes down. There's definitely something wrong with this batch, but what choice do you have? The water from the well is brown and smells of sewage. The river is where everyone dumps their waste. The ale, for all its faults, at least won't give you the flux. Probably your spouse stirs now. Awakened by your movement, or perhaps by their own hunger, they look at you with eyes that mirror your own exhaustion, your own resignation. No words are needed. You tear the remaining bread in half, a gesture of sharing that's both loving and practical. Neither of you can survive alone. The children will need to be fed to, somehow. The baby still nurses, thank God, though your wife's milk is thin and often insufficient. The older children, they'll make do with whatever can be found. Perhaps today we'll have meat. Your spouse whispers, though you both know it's unlikely. The last time you tasted meat was at the harvest festival months ago. And even then it was just the tough, stringy flesh of an old cow that had finally given up the ghost. The memory of it, the richness, the satisfaction of actual protein, makes your mouth water even now. But meat is for feast days and lords. For you, there's pottage to look forward to. Always pottage, that gray, indefinable stew that's been the staple of peasant diet for generations. You can already picture it, the few vegetables you managed to grow or forage, boiled into submission in the communal pot. Perhaps an onion, definitely some cabbage. There's always cabbage. Maybe some turnips if you're lucky, all of it cooked, until any nutritional value has long since fled, leaving behind only bulk to fill the stomach and quiet the hunger for a few hours. The morning light grows stronger now, reminding you that work awaits. The Lord's fields don't tend themselves, and the autumn harvest is approaching. You'll spend the day laboring on land that isn't yours, growing food you'll never eat, all for the privilege of keeping just enough to maybe, survive another winter. Your back already aches in anticipation, but first, you must finish this pitiful breakfast. You force down the last of the bread, using your finger to collect any crumbs that have fallen. Waste is a sin greater than any the priests preach about. Every morsel counts when you're walking the knife's edge between survival and starvation. As you prepare to face another day, you catch a whiff of something on the morning breeze. Is that fresh bread, real bread? The smell drifts down from the manor house on the hill, where the Lord's kitchen staff are already preparing for the day. The aroma is torture, yeasty and warm and impossibly good. Your stomach, rather than being satisfied by your meager meal, roars back to life with renewed hunger. This is the cruelest part of medieval poverty. It's not just the lack of food, but the constant reminders of what you're missing. The sight of the Lord's hunting parties returning with deer and boar. The sounds of feasting from the great hall while you gnaw on gristle and grain. The smells, the smells of properly prepared food that might as well exist in another world for all the chance you have of tasting it. Your children are beginning to wake now. Their small voices already asking the question you dread. What's for breakfast? You'll give them what you can, a small piece of bread each, carefully rationed, and perhaps some of the wild berries you found yesterday if they haven't spoiled overnight. It won't be enough. It's never enough. But it's what you have, and in this harsh medieval world, that has to be sufficient. As you watch your family slowly come to life, preparing to face another day of hunger and hard work, you're struck by a terrible thought. This is a good day. You have bread, however poor. You have ale, however sour. You have a roof over your head and family around you. Many don't even have that. In the next village over, you heard, the harvest failed completely. People are already dying, and winter hasn't even arrived yet. You push yourself to your feet, joints protesting, stomach still complaining despite the bread and ale. There's work to be done, and hunger is a constant companion whether you acknowledge it or not. As you step outside into the crisp morning air, you're greeted by the familiar sights of your village awakening. Smoke rises from other hovels. People emerge, bent and weathered, to begin their daily struggle for survival. The sun is climbing higher now, indifferent to the suffering below. Another day in medieval England has begun, and with it, the eternal quest for the next meal. You don't know what that meal will be or where it will come from. You only know that finding it will consume most of your waking hours, as it does every day, as it has for everyone you've ever known. And so, with hunger as your constant shadow, and the taste of stale bread still bitter in your mouth, you step forward into whatever this day might bring. Your stomach growls one last time, a reminder that in this world, you're only ever one missed meal away from disaster. But that's a worry for later. Right now, there's work to be done, and perhaps, just perhaps, something edible to be found. Along the way, the morning hunger never truly goes away. It just waits, patient and persistent, for the next opportunity to remind you of your place in the harsh hierarchy of medieval life. And tomorrow morning, you'll wake to its familiar embrace once again. The morning work can wait just a moment longer before you face the day's labors. You need to take stock of what remains in your food stores. It's a ritual born of necessity, this careful accounting of every morsel, every grain, every withered vegetable that stands between your family and starvation. You make your way to what you generously call your pantry, really just a corner of your single-room dwelling, where rough wooden shelves hold your meager supplies. The smell hits you before you even get close. It's a complex bouquet of decay, must, and the sharp ammonia tang of mouse droppings. Your nose has long since become accustomed to these odors. But this morning something seems different, stronger. Your heart sinks as you realize what that probably means. You crouch down beside the lowest shelf where you keep the grain sack, or what's left of it. The rough hemp fabric shows the telltale signs of invasion, small holes chewed through with methodical determination. As you lift the sack, a cascade of grain spills from a new tier in the bottom, mixed with the precious. Barley are the small, dark pellets that confirm your suspicions. The rats have been here. Again, your hands shake slightly as you assess the damage. Maybe a quarter of your remaining grain is gone or contaminated. In a lord's manner, they'd simply throw out anything touched by vermin. But you don't have that luxury. You'll sift through every handful, removing what droppings you can see, knowing full well that disease and death might lurk in what remains. But certain death from starvation versus possible death from disease. It's not really a choice at all. Above the grain, on the next shelf, sits your collection of preserved vegetables. The word preserved is perhaps too generous. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in your walls, you can see the fuzzy growth spreading across what were once turnips. The cabbages, packed in salt that you could barely afford, have turned a suspicious gray color. The smell coming from them is enough to make your empty stomach reconsider its demands for food. You reach for one of the turnips, and your finger sinks into it with disturbing ease. The flesh has gone soft, putrid. Something moves in the rotten vegetable, small, white maggots that have somehow found their way inside. You should be disgusted, would have been disgusted, once upon a time. Now, you simply calculate whether the good parts of the turnip might still be salvageable. Cutting away the rot might leave enough for soup, maybe. The battle against spoilage is one you're destined to lose. You know this, have always known it, but still you fight. Without the luxury of cool, dry storage, your dwelling is perpetually damp from the thatched roof and earth floor. Everything rots with alarming speed. In summer, meat spoils within hours. Vegetables last perhaps a week if you're lucky. And luck, as you've learned, is in short supply for peasants. Your preservation methods are primitive at best. Salt, when you can get it, is worth more than gold. You remember the last time you had enough salt to properly preserve meat. It was after the pig slaughter last autumn, and even then, you only received the organs and scraps that the Lord didn't want. You packed them in precious salt, stored them carefully, and watched helplessly as the damp winter air still found a way to breed corruption in the meat. By Christmas, you were scraping green slime off the pork just to have something to flavor. Your pottage. Smoking is another option, but it requires wood, wood that could otherwise heat your home. It's a devil's bargain. Preserve food for later or stay warm now. Usually, staying warm wins. Because what good is preserved food if you freeze to death before you can eat it? When you do smoke meat, it's over the same fire that heats your home, meaning everything tastes of soot and ash. The smoke is never quite hot enough, never quite dry enough. More often than not, you end up with meat that's both burned on the outside and breeding pestilence on the inside. You move to inspect the small barrel where you keep your pickled vegetables. The vinegar was weak to begin with. Proper wine vinegar is for the wealthy. What you have is little more than ale gone sour, mixed with water and prayer. Lifting the lid releases a smell that makes your eyes water. The vegetables float in murky liquid, and you can see the telltale signs of canned yeast forming on the surface. That white, filmy substance that signals the beginning of the end. Still, pickled vegetables are better than no vegetables. You fish out what might have once been a cucumber, now transformed into something soft and otherworldly. It falls apart in your hands, releasing more of that eye-watering smell. Back it goes into the barrel. Perhaps it will hold together long enough to make it into tonight's pottage. Perhaps not. Either way, it will be eaten. In your world, nothing is truly inedible until it's been tried at least once. The mice are your constant companions in this losing battle. You can hear them now, rustling in the walls, growing bold in the pre-dawn darkness. They're everywhere, in the thatch above, in the walls around you, under the floor beneath your feet. At night, you feel them run across your sleeping body, heading for whatever crumbs they can find. You've tried everything to keep them at bay. The priest sold you a charm against vermin that did nothing but lighten your purse. You've set traps, but the mice are clever and well-fed enough to be cautious. Your cat, when you had a cat, disappeared one harsh winter. You suspect it ended up in someone's pot, though no one would ever admit to such desperation. The rats are worse than mice. Bigger, bolder, more destructive. They don't just eat your food. They contaminate everything they touch with their droppings. A urine. You've seen what rat bite fever can do to a person. The shaking, the sweating, the slow descent into madness and death. Yet still, you must eat food they've touched. What choice is there? You notice movement near the grain sack and freeze. A rat, grown fat on your family's subsistence, regards you with intelligent black eyes. It doesn't run. Why should it? This is as much its home as yours. Maybe more so. It certainly eats better than you do. For a moment, you consider trying to catch it. Rat meat is still meat, after all, and you've eaten worse. But it's gone before you can act. Disappeared into one of the countless holes that perforate your walls. The seasonal cycle of feast and famine governs everything in your pantry right now. In early autumn, you should be at your richest in terms of food. The harvest is coming in. Vegetables are still growing, and the great slaughter of livestock hasn't happened yet. But looking at your shelves, you see only the remnants of last year's stores and the few early vegetables you managed to grow or forage. Come winter, these shelves will be even barer. You try not to think about it, but the knowledge sits heavy in your stomach. The turnips and cabbages that disgust you now will seem like treasures in February. That contaminated grain will be carefully rationed, each handful precious. You've survived winters before, barely, but each year seems harder than the last. Each year, the stores run out a little earlier, the hunger lasts a little longer. You reach for the small pot of honey, your most valuable food item. It's one of the few things that doesn't spoil, a miracle of nature that you guard jealously. The pot is nearly empty now, just a thin layer of crystallized sweetness at the bottom. You've been saving it for when someone falls ill, knowing that sometimes a spoonful of honey is the difference between recovery and death. But looking at your dwindling stores, you wonder if you need to break into it sooner. The wooden box, where you keep dry beans and peas, reveals another disappointment. Weevils have found their way in, despite your best efforts. The small beetles have turned half your legumes into powder and larvae. You'll boil them anyway. Protein is protein, whether it comes from beans or bugs. Your grandmother used to say that weevils were just meat that God put in the vegetables. You're not sure if she was joking or had simply resigned herself to the reality of peasant life. A scuffling sound makes you turn. More rats, probably fighting over some morsel they found. They fight each other as viciously as they raid your stores. Sometimes, in the dark of night, you hear them squealing and battling in the walls. It's like living in a city under siege, except the invaders are already inside the walls, and they're winning. Your exploration reveals other treasures and horrors. A small crock of lard, carefully saved from the last pig butchering, now sporting islands of blue-green mold. You'll scrape off the mold and use it anyway. Fat is too precious to waste. A handful of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, more dust than flavor now. But they'll help mask the taste of spoilage in your cooking. Some wild onions, shriveled but still technically edible. Each item is both a blessing and a curse, sustenance. And sickness wrapped in one package. The frustration builds in your chest. If only you had a proper cellar, cool and dry. If only you had enough salt to preserve things correctly. If only the Lord's laws didn't forbid you from hunting the deer that strip your garden bare. If only, but wishes don't fill stomachs or stop spoilage. You must work with what you have. Fight the losing battle one more day. You begin the tedious process of sorting through the grain, removing what droppings you can see. Your fingers are soon coated with dust and filth, but you continue. This grain represents weeks of labor in the Lord's fields, the small portion you're allowed to keep from your work. Every kernel counts as you work. You notice movement in the grain itself, small beetles that have made their home there. More protein, you think grimly, leaving them where they are. The sound of your family stirring reminds you that time is passing. Soon, they'll need to eat something, anything, to start their day. You look again at your pantry, trying to see potential instead of decay. The spoiled turnips can be trimmed and boiled. The contaminated grain can be ground into flour. Bugs and all, the pickled vegetables, despite their sorry state, will add some flavor to water. It's not much, but it's what you have. Your youngest child appears at your elbow, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looks at the pantry shelves with the casual acceptance of one who has never known abundance. To her, this is simply how food looks, always on the edge of rot, always mixed with things that shouldn't be there, always scarce. She reaches for a withered apple you'd forgotten about, and you don't stop her. The brown spots and soft flesh don't deter her. She's learned, as all peasant children learn, that hunger makes the best sauce. Is there anything good? She asks, though her definition of good would horrify the well-fed. Good means edible. Good means not actively poisonous. Good means it might fill the hollow ache in her belly for a few hours. You manage a smile, ruffling her matted hair. We'll make something good, you tell her, and it's not entirely a lie. You've become expert at making something from nothing, at turning spoilage into sustenance. It's a skill born of necessity, passed down through generations of hungry peasants. As you both stand there, surrounded by the smell of decay and the rustle of vermin, you're struck by how normal this all seems. This constant battle against rot and rats, this careful husbanding of resources that are already half ruined. It's simply life. You don't know any other way. Neither did your parents, nor theirs before them. The pantry, such as it is, represents both your wealth and your vulnerability. Everything you own that's edible is here, under constant assault from the forces of nature and hunger. You send your daughter to wake the others while you begin preparing what breakfast you can. From these meager stores, the day's labor awaits, and you'll need whatever strength this spoiled food can provide. As you work, sorting good from bad, or rather, edible from inedible, you hear the rats returning already, drawn by the grain you've disturbed. The battle continues, as it always has, as it always will. Tomorrow you'll check these shelves again, hoping against hope that somehow things will have improved overnight. They won't have, of course. If anything, the situation will be slightly worse, but you'll make do, as you always do, turning decay into dinner and somehow keeping your family alive another day. It's a miracle, really, though not the kind the priests talk about. It's the everyday miracle of survival against impossible odds, played out in countless peasant pantries across the land. The morning sun climbs higher, its light revealing in harsh detail the reality of your food situation. But there's no time to despair. There's grain to be sorted, vegetables to be salvaged, and somehow a meal to be made from the ruins of your pantry. And so you begin one more day in the endless struggle to keep fed in a world that seems determined to starve you. You hold the remains of yesterday's loaf in your hands, feeling its weight. The weight, in this case, isn't from wholesome grain, but from things that should never be in bread. It's dense like a stone, dark as mud, and about as appetizing. This is your daily bread, the staff of life that the priests speak of in their sermons. Though if this is what's meant to sustain life, it's a wonder anyone survives at all. The morning light streaming through the cracks in your wall illuminates the loaf's surface, revealing its true nature. The crust isn't the golden brown of proper bread, but rather a dull, grayish color that speaks of adulteration and desperation. You could see bits of things embedded in it, small stones, pieces of straw, and other unidentifiable objects that found their way in during the milling or baking process. Each bite is a gamble, a test of your teeth's endurance against whatever foreign objects lurk within. You tear off a piece, and the effort required tells its own story. This isn't bread that yields to gentle pressure. This is bread that fights back, that must be conquered rather than simply eaten. The sound it makes as you tear it is more like ripping leather than breaking bread. Inside, the crumb is dense and slightly green-tinged in places, not the green of mold that comes later, but the green of ground peas and beans mixed with the grain to make it go further. Your jaw already aches in anticipation. Eating peasant bread is work, hard physical labor that leaves your mouth sore and your teeth loose. You've learned to soak it in ale or water, sometimes for hours, just to make it chewable. Even then, it's like eating wet clay, heavy, gritty, and sitting in your stomach like a stone. But it fills the empty space, and that's what matters. The taste is something you've grown accustomed to, though accustomed doesn't mean accepting. It's sour from poor fermentation, bitter from the husks and bran that make up most of its substance, with an underlying earthiness that comes from grain stored long in damp conditions. Sometimes there's a metallic taste too, from the millstones, wearing down, adding their own special ingredient to your daily bread. The miller claims it's good for you, extra minerals he says, though you suspect he just doesn't want to repair his stones. You think of the white bread you once glimpsed at, the Lord's table, manchette bread, they call it, made from finely sifted wheat flour. It was like looking at snow, so white and pure. The Lord's steward had torn a piece off casually, discarding the crust, discarding more good bread than you see in a week. The memory of it torments you sometimes. What must it be like to bite into bread that doesn't fight back, to taste grain, without grit, sweetness without sour, sustenance without suffering? But that's not your world. Your world is this dark loaf, made from whatever grain could be scraped together, rye, mostly, with its tendency to harbor dangerous secrets. You've heard the stories, seen the victims. Ergot, they call it, the devil's fire that grows on damp rye. It turns bread into poison, makes people see demons, causes limbs to blacken and fall off. St. Anthony's fire. The priests name it, as if giving it a holy name makes the suffering more bearable. You examine your bread carefully, looking for the telltale dark purple grains that signal ergot's presence. It's hard to tell in bread this dark, but you look anyway. Last year, a whole family in the next village died from ergot poisoning. They danced themselves to death, the survivors said, seeing visions of hell while their fingers and toes turned black. But they had been hungry, and hungry people can't afford to be choosy about their bread. The communal oven where this bread was baked is another source of both sustenance and sorrow. Once a week, sometimes less if the Lord's baker is using it, the village women gather to bake their loaves. It's a social occasion born of necessity. No one can afford their own oven, and the Lord charges for the use of his. You pay in grain, in labor, in dignity. Everything has a price in the Lord's domain. You remember yesterday's baking day, the walk to the oven with your carefully shaped loaves. Made from grain you ground yourself at the Lord's mill, another tax, another portion taken. The wait as each woman's bread baked, the anxious watching to ensure nothing burned, nothing was stolen. The accusations when someone's loaf came out wrong, who used too much wood, who opened the oven door too soon, who put their inferior loaves too close to someone else's better ones. The oven itself is a temperamental beast, its heat uneven and unpredictable. The bread nearest the fire often burns, while that at the edges stays raw. You've learned to turn your loaves, to fight for the good spots, to accept that some parts will be charcoal, while others are barely cooked. It all gets eaten anyway, burned. Bread, raw bread, moldy bread, it's all just bread when hunger is your constant companion. And then there are the laws. So many laws about bread, the size of bread, they call it, regulating the weight and price of loaves. But those laws are for bakers who sell to townspeople, not for peasants grinding their own grain and baking their own sad loaves. You're subject to different laws, the Lord's laws. You must grind your grain at his mill, bake your bread in his oven, pay his taxes at every turn. The bread in your hand represents not just sustenance, but obligation, each bite flavored with the bitterness of servitude. You watch your children gnaw on their portions, their young teeth struggling with the dense bread. Your eldest has learned to dunk his piece repeatedly in water, creating a kind of porridge that can be swallowed without much chewing. Your youngest still cries when given her portion, not understanding why food must hurt. You've seen children, with teeth ground down to nubs by years of peasant bread, gums bleeding from the constant assault of grit and stone. The knowledge that this bread is slowly destroying your teeth adds another layer of despair. Without teeth, how will you eat even this poor excuse for bread? You've seen the toothless elderly, surviving on gruel and whatever can be mashed into paste. It's a future that awaits you all, written in every painful bite of your daily bread. Sometimes you dream of bread, not the white bread of the wealthy, that's the far beyond imagination, but decent bread, brown perhaps but without stones, without sawdust, without the taste of desperation. Bread that nourishes rather than merely fills, bread that doesn't leave your mouth bloody or your stomach heavy as lead. It's a modest dream, but even modest dreams are luxury when you're a peasant. Your neighbor appears at your door, holding half a loaf. Her bread is even worse than yours. You can see the sawdust, mixed in, a common adulterant when grain runs short. The miller adds it, claiming it makes the bread go further. What it really does is tear up your insides, leaving splinters in your throat and pain in your gut. But she's proud of this loaf. It's bread, after all, and having any bread is better than having none. You trade information about your respective loaves. Hers has less ergot, perhaps, but more stones. Yours has suspicious yellow patches, probably from moldy grain, but at least it holds together. It's a grim kind of commerce, this comparison of suffering, but it's also community. You're all in this together, united by your shared experience of bread that seems designed to punish rather than nourish. The church bells ring, calling you to morning mass. The priest will hold up the communion wafer, pure white, light as air, made from the finest wheat flour, the body of Christ. He'll say, placing that perfect morsel on your tongue for just a moment, you'll taste what bread should be. Then it's back to reality, back to your dark loaf with its burden of grit and grief. You've heard that in times of true famine, people make bread from acorns, from tree bark, from grass. You've not reached that point yet, though you've been close. During the bad winter 3 years ago, you ground dried peas into flour, mixed it with the last of your barley, and made loaves that were more vegetable than grain. They fell apart when touched and tasted like dirt, but they filled the void. That's what bread is for people like you. Not enjoyment, not nourishment, just something to quiet the constant cry of an empty stomach. The children have finished their portions, such as they were. Already they're asking when they can have more. Not because the bread is good, but because the hunger is bad. You divide the remaining piece among them, keeping nothing for yourself. Your stomach protests, but their need is greater. You can survive on pottage and whatever else the day might bring. They need the substance, such as it is, that only bread can provide. As you prepare for the day's labor, you wrap the last small heel of bread carefully. It will be your meal in the fields, eaten hurriedly between tasks, washed down with warm water that tastes of the leather flask that holds it. By then, the bread will be even harder, even more difficult to chew, but it will be there, a constant. If miserable companion, the staff of life that feels more like a cudgel, you look at your hands, stained gray from handling the bread. The color comes off on everything, your clothes, your skin, your children. It's the mark of poverty, this gray tinge that proclaims to the world that you eat peasant bread. The wealthy stay pale and clean, their white bread leaving no trace. But you wear your diet like a badge, involuntary and inescapable. The irony doesn't escape you. Bread, the most basic of foods, the foundation of civilization, the symbol of God's providence, and yet for you, it's a daily source of misery. Each loaf is a small tragedy, a corruption of what food should be. But it's your tragedy, your daily bread, and you'll eat it with whatever gratitude you can muster. Because the alternative, no bread at all, is too terrible to contemplate. Tomorrow you'll grind more grain. If you have any, you'll pay the miller his tax, watch him add his adulterants, accept whatever comes out of his stones. You'll shape it into loaves with hands that know no other way. Bake it in an oven that chars and undercooks in equal measure, and produce more of the same gray, dense, painful bread that has sustained and slowly poisoned your family for generations. This is your staff of life, though it bears little resemblance to life as it should be lived. It's bread born of poverty, shaped by oppression, and consumed with the resignation of those who have never known better. And as you step out into the morning sun, ready to labor in fields that will produce grain you'll barely taste, you carry with you the knowledge that this bread, terrible as it is, stands between you and starvation. It's not much of a barrier, but it's all you have. The taste lingers in your mouth, sour, bitter, gritty. The weight sits in your stomach like a stone. Your teeth ache from the morning's assault. This is bread in your world, the staff of suffering that somehow, miraculously, keeps you upright for another day, and tomorrow, God willing and the grain holding out, you'll face it all again. The pot sits in the center of your dwelling, squat and black with years of soot, eternally simmering over the low fire that never quite goes out. This is the heart of your home. More important than any bed or bench, this pot, with its endless cycle of pottage, is what keeps your family from starvation. You approach it now with the same mixture of resignation and desperate hope that you bring to every meal. The smell hits you first. It's not a good smell. How could it be? It's the smell of vegetables boiled past recognition, of scraps that were questionable to begin with, of smoke and ash and the metallic tang of the old iron pot. But underlying all of that is the smell of sustenance, of something warm that will fill the hollow spaces inside you. Your mouth waters despite itself. You peer into the depths of the pot, stirring with a wooden spoon so old and worn it's taken on the same gray color as the pottage itself. What greets you is exactly what you expected, a thick, grayish mass that bubbles slowly like some primordial swamp. It's impossible to identify individual ingredients anymore. Everything is melded into this uniform paste that is neither liquid nor solid, neither food nor not food. It simply is, eternal and unchanging as poverty itself. This batch has been cooking for 3 days now. That's how pottage works. It never really ends, never really begins. You add to it as you find things, water it down when it gets too thick, thicken it with grain when it gets too thin. The same pot of pottage might contain vegetables from last week, grain from yesterday, and whatever forage greens you found this morning. It's a living thing, evolving constantly yet always remaining essentially the same gray, viscous mass. You remember starting this particular pot. There had been cabbage. There's always cabbage. Tough outer leaves that even the Lord's pigs wouldn't eat. A few turnips, woody and bitter, but still technically edible. Some onions that had sprouted in storage, more green shoot than bulb. A handful of dried peas, hard as pebbles and about as flavorful. These formed the base. Boiled in water that already tasted of smoke from the fire. Since then, you've added whatever came to hand. Yesterday it was some wild garlic and dandelion. Leaves, weeds to the wealthy, dinner to you. The day before, a handful of barley and some unidentifiable roots you dug up from the edge of the forest. Each addition disappears into the pot, losing its individual character to become part of the collective gray. It's democratic. In a way, everything equal in the pot, everything reduced to the same common denominator of barely edible mush. The consistency is what strikes you most. Thick enough to coat the spoon, thin enough to pour. It occupies some unholy middle ground between soup and porridge. When hot, it moves with a sluggish life of its own, bubbling and plopping like mud in a bog. When cold, and you've eaten it, cold many times when fuel was too precious to waste on reheating, it congeals into something with the texture of mortar. You've joked, in the darkest humor of the desperate, that you could build a house with cold pottage. It would probably last longer than your current dwelling. You taste it. The morning ritual of checking if today's pottage is better or worse than yesterday's. The flavor is, well, flavor is a generous word. It tastes of boiled vegetation and smoke, with an underlying bitterness from the turnips and a metallic note from the pot itself. Sometimes you catch a hint of whatever the most recent addition was. Today, perhaps, a slight garlicky note from yesterday's forage. But mostly it tastes like pottage always tastes, like surrender, like making do, like the absence of choice. Your family gathers around the pot, each holding their wooden bowl. These bowls, carved by your grandfather's hands, are smooth with use. The wood grain worn away by countless meals of pottage, you ladle out portions, trying to ensure everyone gets some of the thicker parts, not just the watery gray liquid that separates on top. It's a skill, this ladling, making sure no one feels cheated. Everyone gets their share of whatever solid bits have survived the endless boiling. The children eat without complaint. This is all they've known. This gray stew that stretches ingredients beyond all recognition, that fills bellies without nourishing bodies. They've learned not to ask, what's in it? The answer is always the same anyway. Whatever there was. Sometimes, you don't even know yourself. Things go into the pot and disappear, transformed by heat and time into anonymous sustenance. You watch your youngest struggle with a particularly fibrous piece of something, cabbage stalk, perhaps, or turnip core. These harder bits never quite break down, no matter how long they cook. They float in the pottage like tiny islands of texture in an otherwise uniform sea. She chews determinedly, her small face screwed up with effort. Finally, she swallows. And you see the brief grimace as it goes down, but she takes another spoonful immediately. Hunger is the best sauce, the only sauce you can afford. The pot never empties completely, even when you've ladled out every possible portion. There's always a residue at the bottom, too thick to pour, too precious to waste. This becomes the base for tomorrow's pottage, the starter for another endless cycle. You've heard that bakers have something similar, a mother dough that goes on forever. Your pot is like that. Each day's meal connected to the last in an unbroken chain stretching back longer than anyone can. Remember that sometimes, on feast days or after a successful bit of foraging, you have meat for the pot, not fresh meat that's beyond dreaming, but scraps and bones begged from the Lord's kitchen or saved from some animal that died of natural causes. You remember the last time, months ago now, when you had a ham bone. It was already well gnawed, just the faintest scraps of meat clinging to it. But what a difference it made. For days, the pottage had an almost rich quality, a depth of flavor, that made you eat more slowly, savoring each spoonful, even after the bone was removed. Soft enough to crumble between your fingers, its ghost lingered in the pot for another week. But most days are like today, vegetables and grain, vegetation, and hope, boiled into submission. The consistency tells you this batch is getting old. It's thicker than it should be. Despite the water you added this morning, soon you need to start fresh. Scraping out the pot and beginning again, it's always a fraught moment, that transition. The old pottage might be terrible, but it's familiar terrible. Who knows what the new batch will bring? Your neighbor's son died last month from bad pottage. Something poisonous had found its way in, a misidentified mushroom, perhaps, or vegetables that had gone far past edible. The whole family was sick, but the boy, already weakened by winter's hardships, couldn't fight it off. You attended the funeral, watched them lower his small body into the ground, and thought about how careful you need to be. Every addition to the pot is a gamble. Every wild plant, every questionable vegetable, every scrap of dubious origin could be the one that turns sustenance into poison. But what choice is there? You can't afford to be too particular. When your children's ribs show through their skin, when their eyes grow dull with hunger, you'll put anything in the pot that might fill their bellies. You've eaten pottage made with grass, with tree bark, with things you'd rather not remember. During the famine years, people made pottage with clay, just to feel something solid in their stomachs. Some died from it, intestines blocked with mud, but others survived. That's always the calculation, risk versus hunger, possible death versus certain starvation. The smoke from the fire stings your eyes as you stir the pot again. The fire itself is a constant concern. Too hot, and the pottage burns on the bottom, adding a charred taste to its already questionable flavor. Too cool, and it doesn't cook properly, leaving heart centers in vegetables and encouraging the growth of things that shouldn't grow. You've become expert at maintaining just the right temperature, feeding the fire with carefully rationed fuel, keeping it alive, but not ambitious. The burned bits at the bottom of the pot are actually prized. They have more flavor, a slightly caramelized quality that passes for deliciousness in your world. The children always hope to get some of these crusty pieces in their portions. You scrape them up carefully when ladling, distributing them like treasures among the bowls. It's the small things that matter when everything else is gray monotony. Your spouse returns from checking the vegetable garden, carrying a handful of sorry-looking leeks and some cabbage leaves that the insects have turned into lace. These will go into the pot soon, adding their contribution to the eternal stew. First, though, they must be cleaned. Check for the worst of the rot, the insects shaken off. Even then, you know there will be extra protein in tonight's pottage. The children don't mind anymore. Moving things in their food stopped bothering them years ago. As the morning progresses, the pottage continues its slow bubble. You'll eat from it again at midday, and again in the evening. Maybe by then you'll have found something else to add, some herbs from the roadside, some grain bartered from a neighbor, some vegetable peelings begged from the Lord's kitchen. Each addition changes the pottage slightly, but never fundamentally. It remains what it has always been, the baseline of survival, the minimum required to keep body and soul together. You think sometimes of the Lord's table, of the multiple dishes served at each meal, meat and fish and bread and vegetables each prepared separately, each maintaining its own identity. The very idea of food that tastes like itself seems impossibly luxurious. In your world, everything tastes like pottage. because everything eventually becomes pottage. It's the great equalizer, the melting pot of poverty. The children have finished their portions and drift away to begin their daily tasks. You're left alone with the pot, this eternal companion. The fire needs feeding, so you add a few sticks, watching the flames lick at the blackened bottom. The pottage responds with renewed bubbling, as if grateful for the attention. You stir it once more, noting that you need more water soon. The well is a long walk, and the water tastes of mud, but it will stretch the pottage another day. This is your life, measured out in bowls of gray stew, each day the same, each meal a slight variation on an eternal theme. The pottage connects you to yesterday and tomorrow, an unbroken chain of survival. It's not living, exactly, but it's not dying. Either, it's existing, one gray spoonful at a time. As you bank the fire to keep it smoldering until the next meal, you offer up a prayer of sorts, not for better food, that's beyond the reach of prayer, but for the pottage to remain edible, for nothing poisonous to find its way in, for the pot to keep producing its gray bounty day after day. In a world where starvation is always just one failed harvest away, even bad pottage is a blessing. The pot settles into its daytime simmer, the surface occasionally breaking with lazy bubbles. It will be here when you return from the fields, ready to offer its dubious comfort. Tomorrow it will be here too, and the day after. The pottage endures, gray and eternal, the taste of peasant life distilled into its most basic form, and you endure with it, bound together in the grim partnership of survival. The rabbit hangs from your belt, still warm, its dead eyes reflecting the morning sun. Your heart pounds not from the chase, but from fear. What you've done is punishable by death, a peasant taking game from the Lord's forest. But your children haven't tasted meat in 3 months, and desperation makes criminals of honest folk. You hurry through the underbrush, every snapping twig sounding like the gamekeeper's approach. Every bird call a potential alarm. Meat. The very word conjures memories so vivid you can taste them. Not the daily reality of meat in your world. Tough, stringy, half-rotten things that barely deserve the name, or real meat. The kind you might taste once or twice a year if fortune smiles. The memory of it haunts you, makes your mouth water even as your stomach churns with anxiety over your crime. You think back to the last time your family had proper meat. It was after old Gertrude's cow died. The ancient beast finally succumbed to age and disease. The carcass had been divided among several families, and your portion was small, mostly organs and the tougher cuts that even the dogs struggled with. But it was meat. You remember the children's faces when you added those precious pieces to the pottage, how they fished for the chunks with their spoons, savoring each fibrous bite. That meat had been legal, if barely edible. The cow had been sick, anyone could see that. The meat had a greenish tinge in places, and the smell, but you'd boiled it for hours, prayed over it, and eaten it gratefully. Only 2 of you got sick, and everyone recovered. That's what passes for a successful meat meal in your world. The rabbit in your possession is different. This is fresh, healthy meat, the kind reserved for the Lord's table. Your children have never tasted anything like it. Part of you wonders if their bodies, so accustomed to deprivation, will even be able to handle such richness. But that's a worry for later. First, you have to get home without being caught. The forest laws are clear and merciless. All game belongs to the Lord. Every deer, every boar, every rabbit, even the birds in the trees. The forest itself belongs to him, and entering it without permission is a crime. Taking game is worse than theft. It's a direct challenge to the social order. You've seen men hang for less than what dangles from your belt right now. But hunger has its own laws. When your youngest son looks at you with eyes to large in his shrunken face, when your wife's milk dries up because she's too malnourished to feed the baby, when you watch your family slowly starving despite working from dawn to dusk, that's when the Lord's laws cease to matter. You'd risk hanging 100 times over for the chance to see your children eat real meat. You make it home, slipping through the door like a thief. Your wife sees the rabbit, her face goes white. She knows the risk as well as you do, but she also sees what you see, a chance for nourishment, for something beyond the eternal gray pottage. Her hands shake as she takes the rabbit, already planning how to use every part of it. Nothing will be wasted. Nothing can be wasted. The preparation is hurried, furtive. The rabbit must be skinned and butchered quickly, the evidence disposed of. The fur will be burned. You can't risk trying to use it, though it pains you to waste anything. The bones will be boiled multiple times until they dissolve into the pottage. Every scrap of meat, every organ, even the eyes, all will be used as Your wife works. You think about the irony of your situation. The forests are full of game. Deer strip bark from trees in winter, their populations carefully maintained for the Lord's hunting pleasure. Wild boar root through the undergrowth, growing fat on acorns that you're forbidden to gather. Birds nest in every tree, rabbits breed in every warren, and all of it, is denied to the people who need it most. You remember your grandfather's stories of the time before the forest laws, when a common man could hunt for his family's survival. Those days are long gone, swallowed by the Norman conquest and the endless expansion of royal forests. Now, even gathering fallen wood is a crime. The very abundance of nature has been locked away, reserved for those who already have more than enough. The smell of cooking meat fills your small dwelling, and it's both wonderful and terrifying. It's a smell that doesn't belong here, that marks you as clearly as a brand. You stuff rags under the door, hope the wind doesn't carry the scent to the wrong nose. Your children gather round, drawn by the aroma like moths to flame. They've smelled meat cooking before, but always from a distance, from the Lord's kitchen, from the better-off merchants in the market, never from their own fire. Your wife has added the rabbit to the pottage, but carefully, lovingly. For once, the meat isn't gray and stringy, but pink and tender. She's saved the best pieces to cook separately, a luxury you can barely conceive of. Meat that tastes like meat, not like the 100 other things that have shared its pot as you. Wait for it to cook. You think about all the meat you've eaten in your life. The word meat covers such a broad range of experiences in the peasant world. There's the meat you get at harvest time, the old animals slaughtered before winter, tough as leather and twice as tasteless. There's the meat from animals that died of disease, sold cheap because no one else will buy it. There's the meat that's already turning, rescued from complete putrefaction by heavy salting and long boiling. And then there are the things you don't talk about. The dogs that disappear during hard winters, the cats that vanish when children are crying from hunger, the rats that sometimes find their way into the pot, disguised by darkness and desperation. You've eaten things that would make your stomach turn in better times and been grateful for them. But fresh rabbit, this is something else entirely. Your mouth waters as your wife portions it out, making sure everyone gets some. The children's eyes are wide with anticipation. They eat slowly, uncertainly, as if they're not quite sure what to do with food that has actual flavor, actual texture beyond the usual mush. Your youngest bites into a piece and his face transforms. It's like watching the sun break through clouds. He chews slowly, savoring, and you see tears in his eyes. When did food last bring joy instead of mere sustenance? When did eating become something more than just pushing back hunger for another day? The meal is over too quickly. Despite your wife's careful portioning, despite eating as slowly as possible, the meat is gone, but its effects linger. There's color in your children's cheeks, a brightness in their eyes that wasn't there before. One proper meal won't cure malnutrition, won't erase years of deprivation, but it reminds their bodies what they're fighting for. As night falls, the fear returns. Every sound outside could be the Lord's men, coming to search for poachers. The rabbit's bones are in the pot now, releasing their nutrients into tomorrow's pottage. By morning, there will be no evidence except the unusual richness of your stew. But guilt and fear don't dissolve as easily as bones. You lie awake thinking about the price of meat in your world. Not the monetary price, you have no money anyway, but the real price, the risk of death for a rabbit, the acceptance of spoiled meat that might kill you, the gradual watching of your family fade from lack of proper nourishment. The Lord's hounds eat better meat daily than your children have seen in their entire lives. Tomorrow, if you're lucky, you might find a bird that flew into a wall, or come across a merchant willing to sell you scraps that even he can't stomach. More likely, it will be another day of meatless pottage, of watching your family survive on vegetables and grain. While the forest teems with forbidden plenty, the memory of tonight's meal will fade, become another story to sustain you through hungry times. Remember when we had rabbit? Well, join the litany of past feasts, real and imagined, that help you endure. But for now, for this one night, your children sleep with full bellies and the taste of real meat on their tongues die in your world. That's worth risking everything for. The forest will still be there tomorrow, full of game you can't touch. The Lord's laws will still hang over you like a sword. But tonight, your family ate meat, real, fresh, life-giving meat, and sometimes that's all the victory a peasant can hope for. You stand at the well's edge, peering down into the darkness below. The smell rises up to meet you, fetid, swampy, with undertones of decay that make your stomach turn even though it's empty. This is your water source, shared with every family. In the village, every animal that can reach it, and God knows what else that falls or crawls into its depths. The bucket comes up brown and murky, with things floating in it that you don't examine too closely. This is what passes for water in your world. The choice before you is the same one you face every day. Risk the water or drink the ale. Neither option is good. Both carry their own dangers. But thirst, like hunger, doesn't allow for abstinence. You must choose your poison. Literally, you let the water settle in the bucket, watching the larger particles sink to the bottom. There's a film on the surface, sometimes green, sometimes oily with rainbow sheens that would be beautiful if they didn't signal contamination. Your grandmother used to say, you could tell the season by the color of the well water. Spring brought green algae blooms, summer turned it brown with runoff, autumn added the red of fallen leaves and rust. Winter was the worst, black with decay and sometimes frozen solid, forcing you to break through ice to reach the liquid danger below. The memory of your youngest daughter haunts you. As you contemplate the bucket, she'd been so thirsty after working. In the summer heat, too impatient to wait for ale, the water had seemed clearer than usual that day, almost drinkable. Within hours, she was burning with fever. The flux took her 3 days later. Her small body racked with cramps as everything. Liquid fled her system. The priest said it was God's will. You knew it was bad water, but knowing didn't bring her back. Since then, water has been the enemy. Oh, you use it for cooking. Boiling might kill whatever lurks within, though you're never certain. You use it for washing, when you wash at all. But drinking is straight. That's Russian roulette with a cup instead of a gun. Every sip might carry death and diseases you can't see, can't understand, can only fear. So you turn to ale, the peasant's salvation and curse rolled into one bitter brew. Your morning ale sits in its jug, thick and cloudy, more like liquid bread than anything resembling drink. This isn't the clear, hoppy ale of the taverns in town. This is small ale, weak ale, the dregs of brewing that nonetheless might keep you alive another day. You pour a cup and examine it with the resignation of long practice. Bits of grain float on the surface. The color is somewhere between mud and amber. Depending on the light, the smell is yeasty and sour with hints of the vegetables that sometimes find their way into the brewing pot when grain is scarce. It's thick enough that you need to chew it occasionally, working through the chunks of half-fermented matter that escape the straining cloth. But it's safer than water, probably. The brewing process, crude as it is, kills some of what would otherwise kill you. The alcohol, weak though it may be, provides a barrier against the worst of the contamination. Your entire family drinks ale from the moment they're weaned. Children grow up slightly drunk. Adults maintain a constant low-level intoxication. And everyone accepts this as the price of avoiding the flux. The brewing is women's work, done weekly if grain permits. You watch your wife at her brewing pot, adding precious grain to water that's been boiled and reboiled. The process is more art than science, more hope than certainty. Sometimes the ale is passable, almost pleasant if you're generous with your definitions. Sometimes it's so sour it strips the lining from your throat, or so thick you could mortar walls with it. But it's ale, and ale means survival. The irony doesn't escape you, using grain that could be food to make drink, because the water isn't safe. It's a devil's arithmetic that defines peasant life. Every bushel of barley that goes into the brewing pot is a bushel that doesn't become bread. But bread won't help if you're dead from dysentery. So you make the trade and pray the harvest holds out. Your neighbor's family learned this lesson the hard way. Trying to stretch their grain supply, they've been drinking more water than ale. One bad well, one contaminated bucket, and half the family was down with fever. The survivors are skeletal now, bodies ravaged by disease that clean water would have prevented. They brew religiously now, even if it means going hungry. Better to starve slowly than die quickly in agony. The children complain about the ale sometimes, not about the taste. They've never known anything better, but about the way it makes their heads fuzzy. How hard it is to think clearly when you're always slightly drunk. You see it in their movements, slightly uncoordinated, their reactions. Just a beat too slow. An entire generation growing up impaired, not by choice, but by necessity. You think about the Lord's table, where wine flows freely and water comes from protected springs. They have wells that are guarded, clean, maintained. Their water runs clear. You've seen it when working in the castle. It sparkles in crystal goblets like liquid diamonds. They drink it without fear, without the careful inspection and resigned acceptance that marks every peasant's relationship with liquid, but wine and clean water aren't for the likes of you. Your world is ale and contamination, choosing between different kinds of poison. You've heard that in far-off lands, people drink tea made with boiled water, or something called coffee that requires heating. Perhaps those methods kill what lurks in the water, but tea and coffee are exotic dreams. Your reality is ale, thick and sour and barely alcoholic enough to keep disease at bay. The afternoon heat makes thirst unbearable. You've been working the Lord's field since dawn, sweat pouring from every pore. Your body cries out for water, clear and cool and clean. Instead, you have your leather flask of ale, now warm and even more sour from the heat. It does little to refresh, coating your throat with yeasty thickness instead of providing relief. But you drink it anyway, because the alternative is worse, sometimes in desperation. You try to clean the water. Straining it through cloth helps a little, removing the visible chunks. Letting it settle helps too, though you're never sure if you're drinking the cleaner top layer or just the part where the invisible killers float. You've tried adding vinegar. Heard it might purify somehow. You've even tried praying over it, though God seems to have little interest in the quality of peasant water. The well itself is a source of constant anxiety. It's too close to the midden heap, too close to where animals are kept, too close to everything that contaminates. But wells aren't dug on a whim. This one has been here since before your grandfather's time, and it will be here after your grandchildren are gone. Moving it would require permission, labor, and money, none of which exist in your world. You watch the village children playing near the well, and your heart clenches. How many of them will die from bad water before they reach adulthood? How many will survive, but be weakened? Their growth stunted by constant low-level illness. The strong survive, people say, but strength means nothing against invisible demons in the water supply. Evening approaches, and with it the ritual of drawing water for the night. You'll boil it for pottage, hope the heat kills whatever shouldn't be consumed. You'll brew more ale if grain permits, accepting the devil's bargain of mild intoxication over violent illness. You'll watch your family drink, every swallow a gamble, every day a victory against the odds. The bucket goes down again, splashing into darkness. What comes up might sustain life or end it. There's no way to know until it's too late. This is water in your world, not the clear, life-giving force of nature, but a murky threat that must be filtered through grain and fermentation to be even marginally safe. You pour the water into your pot, add it to the eternal pottage, at least. This way, boiled and mixed with whatever vegetables you found, it might be neutralized. The ale jug stands ready for drinking, thick and unappetizing, but safer than the alternative. Your family gathers for the evening meal, and cups are filled with the lesser of two evils. Tomorrow you'll face the same choice again. Water that might kill quickly, or ale that impairs slowly. Neither option leads to health, to clarity, to the vital force that clean water should provide. But in a world where every choice is between bad and worse, you take what you can get and pray it's enough to see another dawn. The last light fades as you secure the water vessels for the night. Somewhere, in places you'll never see, people drink without fear, wash without worry, live without the constant calculation of risk versus thirst. But that's their world, not yours. Your world is this, the daily gamble of hydration, the careful balance between poison and preservation, the acceptance that even the most basic human need comes with a potentially lethal price. You raise your cup of ale in a mock toast to another day survived, the bitter taste familiar as breathing. Tomorrow will bring the same choices, the same risks, the same resignation. But tonight, your family drinks and lives, and in your world, that's the only victory that matters. The smells reach you first, carried on the evening wind from the castle on the hill. Roasting meat, not the putrid, desperate smell of spoiled flesh boiled into submission, but the rich aroma of fresh venison turning on a spit. Beneath it, layers of scent that make your empty stomach clench with desire. Fresh bread, sweet with honey and butter. The exotic perfume of spices worth more than your entire existence. Wine mulling with cinnamon and cloves. These smells are torture made manifest, drifting down to the village like a cruel reminder of everything you'll never have. You're hauling water from the well. When the feast preparations begin in earnest, it's the Lord's Son's birthday, or perhaps a visiting noble requires entertainment. The reasons matter less than the ritual of excess. That follows. From your position in the village below, you can see the constant stream of supplies entering the castle gates. Carts laden with wheels of cheese, barrels of wine, caged chickens squawking their way to noble tables, more food passes through those gates in a single afternoon than your family will see in a year. The hunting party returned this morning, their success announced by the blowing of horns. You watched them pass, trying not to stare obviously at the deer carcasses draped over pack horses, at the wild boar carried on poles between triumphant hunters. The dogs that assist in these hunts eat scraps of meat daily. That would seem like miracles to your children. Even now, you can hear them baying in the castle kennels, probably fighting over bones with more meat on them than you've seen in months. Your wife appears at your side, her face drawn with the particular exhaustion that comes from making something from nothing day after day. She just smells the feast preparations, sees the smoke rising from the castle's many chimneys. They're roasting 3 whole pigs, she says quietly. Information gleaned from her cousin who works in the castle laundry, and 6 deer for one meal. The numbers are staggering, impossible to truly comprehend. 6 deer, you think of the rabbit. That nearly cost you your life. Of how that small amount of meat transformed your family for one brief evening. 6 entire deer, their meat tender and well fed, seasoned with salt and herbs, basted with butter and wine. Your mouth floods with saliva even as your heart burns with the injustice of it all. You've been inside the castle kitchen exactly once, delivering grain as part of your labor obligations. The memory haunts you like a fever dream. Tables groaning, under the weight of food being prepared, massive hearths where entire animals turn on spits, tended by sweating kitchen boys who look better fed than anyone in your village. Pots larger than your entire dwelling, simmering with stews that use more meat in one cooking than your family had seen in their lifetime. But it wasn't just the quantity that struck you, it was the waste. You watched in horror as a cook trimmed the burned edges from a roast and tossed them aside. Perfectly edible meat, slightly charred perhaps, but still nutritious, thrown away like garbage. Bread crusts cut off and discarded because nobles prefer their bread without edges. Vegetables with slight blemishes rejected for not meeting the aesthetic standards of the high table. More food wasted in an hour that would keep your family alive for a month. The kitchen servants, you noticed, were plump, not fat like the nobles, but well fed in a way that marked them as existing in a different world from yours. They nibbled as they worked, tasting here, sampling there. A kitchen boy no older than your eldest son absently chewed on a chicken leg while turning a spit. The casual abundance of it all made you dizzy with desire and rage. Now, as darkness falls, the feast begins in earnest. You can hear it from the village, music drifting down, laughter and conversation. Occasionally, when the wind is right, you catch fragments of sound that paint pictures in your hungry imagination. The clink of goblets, the scrape of knives on plates, the satisfied sounds of people eating their fill and then continuing to eat for pleasure. Alone die your evening meal. By contrast is the same gray pottage, perhaps slightly improved by the bones from that long ago rabbit still lending their essence to the pot. Your children eat in silence, but you know they hear the sounds from above. How do you explain to a hungry child why some people feast while others starve? How do you make sense of a world where proximity to power determines whether you eat meat or dream of it? Why do they need so much food? Your youngest asks, and the innocence of the question breaks your heart. In his world, food is for survival, the concept of eating for entertainment, of having so much that you can afford to be selective, is as foreign as the spices flavoring the Lord's meat. You try to explain about rank and privilege, about the divine, order that places some in castles and others in hovels. But the words taste like ash in your mouth. What divine plan includes children with distended bellies from malnutrition, living in the shadow of halls where food is theater? Your explanation trails off into silence. Some questions don't have answers, only entrance dot as the evening progresses. You find reasons to be outside, drawn by terrible fascination to witness the excess. Through the castle's lit windows, you can see shadows of the feast in progress. Servants rushing back and forth with laden platters, the occasional glimpse of nobles at table, raising goblets, gesturing with meat-laden knives. It's like watching a mystery play about a heaven you'll never enter. The dogs get the scraps. You've seen this before. After the feast, the castle dogs are thrown the remains. Bones with meat still clinging, entire haunches barely touched, trenchers of bread soaked with gravy and discarded. The dogs eat better than your children. Their coats glossy with good nutrition while your family slowly starves. Sometimes you've considered begging for the dog scraps, but the humiliation would kill you faster than hunger. Occasionally, very occasionally, there are leftovers that make their way to the village. Usually it's the lower servants who smuggle them out, trading favor or fulfilling family obligations. Your wife's cousin sometimes manages to secret away a heel of bread or a particularly gristly piece of meat rejected by noble teeth. These treasures are shared in darkness, eaten quickly before anyone can question their providence. But tonight, there will be no such fortune. The feast is too important, the scrutiny too intense. Every morsel will be accounted for, even if it ends up in a dog's belly or the midden heap. You'll return to your hovel empty-handed, the smell of roasted meat clinging to your clothes like an accusation. The psychological torture of these feasts extends beyond mere hunger. It's the casual cruelty of abundance displayed before the desperate. It's knowing that the cost of one noble meal could feed your village for a season. It's watching your children grow stunted while the Lord's children grow fat. It's the grinding, daily reminder that you exist not as a person, but as a tool, worthy of just enough sustenance to continue laboring for those who feast. You remember stories your grandfather told of times when the harvest failed completely. Even then, the castle feasts continued, while peasants ate bark and clay, while children died with grass stains around their mouths from desperate attempts to find anything edible. The nobles imported grain from afar and complained about the quality of wine. The feast must go on, regardless of the famine outside the walls. There's a special kind of anger that comes from watching others waste what you desperately need. It burns low and constant, like the embers of your cooking fire. You push it down as you push down hunger and despair, and all the other emotions that serve no purpose in your world. But on nights like this, when the sounds of excess mock your deprivation, the anger flares bright and dangerous. Your neighbor joins you in the darkness. Drawn by the same terrible magnetism, together you stand in silence, watching the lit windows, smelling the impossible smells, hearing the sounds of a world so close and yet impossibly distant. He's thinking of his children too, of the daughter who died last winter, her body too weak from malnutrition to fight off a simple cold, of the son whose legs are beginning to bow from rickets. They say the king's feast last month used 1,000 chickens, he whispers, 1,000 chickens. The number is meaningless in its enormity. You try to imagine 1,000 of anything and fail. Your world is measured in single digits. One more day of survival, to more turnips found. 3 more months until the harvest. Thousands belong to a mathematics of excess you'll never comprehend. The feast will continue long into the night. Course after course, wine flowing endless. Food prepared and presented and partially consumed and discarded. Tomorrow, the castle. Awake late, nobles groaning from overindulgence, complaining of sour stomachs and aching heads from too much rich food. The irony of suffering from too much while you suffer from too little is not lost on you. You turn away finally, the sounds and smells too much to bear. Your family waits in darkness. They don't waste rushlight just to see each other's hungry faces. You'll lie on your straw pallet and try not to think of meat turning on spits, of bread white as clouds, of wine flowing like water. You'll push down the anger, the envy, the desperate unfairness of it all. Tomorrow you'll wake to hunger, as always. You'll eat your gray pottage and drink your sour ale and labor in fields that feed others. The castle will prepare for another meal, perhaps not as grand as tonight's feast, but still beyond your imagining. The cycle continues, as it always has, as it always will. But tonight, for just a moment, you allow yourself to imagine a different world, one where food is distributed by need rather than birth, where children don't starve in the shadow of plenty, where the smell of roasting meat doesn't drift down like a taunt to those who subsist on cabbage water and desperation. The dream fades as quickly as it came. Dreams, like feasts, are for those who can afford them. Your reality is hunger. Theirs is abundance, and never the two shall meet. You return to your hovel, to your hungry family, carrying nothing but the memory of smells you'll never taste and sounds of satisfaction you'll never make. The Lord's feast continues above, bright and loud and impossibly distant. Your famine continues below, dark and quiet and intimately familiar. This is the way of the world, carved in stone as surely as the castle walls that separate their excess from your emptiness. And tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, the feast, and the famine will dance their eternal dance while you watch from the shadows, hungry and enduring. The morning brings news of the autumn slaughter, that annual ritual where livestock too expensive to feed through winter meets its end. You stand with other villagers, watching the Lord's men drive cattle and pigs to their doom. The irony isn't lost on you, animals being killed, because there's not enough fodder to sustain them through the cold months. while you're slowly starved for want of any food at all. The smell of blood hangs heavy in the air as the killing begins. You're allowed to watch, even help sometimes, in exchange for the parts the Lord doesn't want. Offal, they call it. The organs, the heads, the feet. What offends noble sensibilities becomes your treasure. You clutch your bucket, waiting for the precious moment when intestines and lungs and hearts are thrown aside. Other peasants jostle nearby, equally desperate for these scraps. Your share is meager, but precious. A cow's stomach, some intestines that will need careful cleaning, a portion of liver already beginning to smell. These will need to be preserved somehow, stretched through the winter months when even pottage becomes a luxury. You hurry home with your bloody burden, knowing that time is your enemy now. Meat spoils fast, and spoiled meat that's been preserved badly can kill quicker than starvation. The preservation process is a battle against inevitability. Salt is dear, too dear for the likes of you. What little you have must be rationed carefully. You pack the organs in a mixture of salt and herbs, wild things gathered from the forest edges. Their preservation properties more hoped for than proven. The intestines are cleaned and stuffed with a mixture of blood, grain, and whatever else can be spared. Blood pudding, it's called, though it bears little resemblance to anything the word pudding should describe. Smoking is your other option. The same fire that barely heats your hovel must now preserve your meat. You hang strips of organ meat near the smoke, knowing they'll taste of soot and ash, but hoping they'll last until Christmas. The process is imperfect, too much smoking. The meat becomes inedible leather, too little and rot sets in. You've seen families poisoned by badly preserved meat, writhing in agony as their bodies reject the corruption they've consumed. Your cellar, such as it is, becomes a chamber of horrors and hopes. Turnips layered in sand, already showing signs of softness, cabbages hanging from the rafters, their outer leaves black with rot that creeps inward daily, carrots buried in earth. If you're lucky enough to have any, each vegetable is a small victory against winter, but you know from experience that many won't survive until spring. They'll rot or freeze or simply disappear, consumed by the same desperation that drives you to eat them half-spoiled. The rancid butter sits in its crock, a testament to failed preservation. It was fresh once, traded for labor during the summer months. Now it's green-tained and sharp-smelling, but still precious. Fat as life during winter. You'll scrape off the worst of the mold and use it anyway, mixing it into pottage where its rancidity might be masked by the general awfulness of everything else. Cheese fares no better. What started as a solid wheel has become a living thing, crawling with maggots that have somehow penetrated its wax coating. You pick them out when you can see them, ignore them when you can't. Protein is protein, your grandmother used to say, whether it comes on legs or in larvae. The cheese tastes of ammonia and decay, but it fills the hollow spaces inside you as autumn fades. You begin your final foraging before snow makes everything impossible. The forest, forbidden though it is, calls with its promise of nuts and mushrooms. You risk the Lord's justice for handfuls of acorns that must be processed carefully to remove their bitterness. Mushrooms are gathered with trembling hands. One mistake and your family joins the countless others who've died from misidentification, but hunger sharpens your eye and steadies your hand. You know the good ones from the bad. Mostly, children are sent to gather rose hips and hawthorn berries, their small fingers better suited to avoiding thorns. They return with baskets of meager provisions and bloody hands, proud of their contribution. These bitter fruits will be dried, stored, added to pottage when nothing else remains. Even the leaves of certain plants are gathered, dried, saved for the desperate times when they'll be boiled into a tea that provides more hope. The nutrition winter arrives with its annual cruelty. The ground freezes, making foraging impossible. Snow covers whatever might have been edible, locks it away until spring. Your carefully preserved foods begin their steady deterioration. The smoked meat grows a fur of mold that must be scraped off before eating. The pickled vegetables turn to mush in their barrels. Everything rots, even in the cold. Because your storage is imperfect and nature is relentless, market day becomes an exercise in futility. You have nothing to sell and no money to buy. You watch merchants display their wares, grain at prices that might as well be in gold, vegetables that cost more than a day's labor, meat that exists in a realm beyond dreaming. The market is for those who have surplus, not for those who count. Every grain and measure survival in spoonfuls of pottage. Fraud is everywhere. Bakers add sawdust and chalk to their bread. Butchers sell meat that's green with age, swearing it's fresh. Millers take more than their share, leaving you with less grain than you started with. Everyone cheats everyone in the grand democracy of desperation. You learn to test everything. Trust nothing, except that being cheated is just another tax on poverty. The violence that erupts over food becomes commonplace. You've seen men kill each other over a loaf of bread. Women tear each other's hair out over a handful of grain. When the baker raises his prices, riots follow. When the miller's fraud is discovered, his mill burns. Hunger makes animals of everyone, strips away the thin veneer of civilization to reveal the desperate creature beneath. As winter deepens, the true horror begins. Food stores run low despite all your careful preservation. The pottage becomes thinner, more water than substance. Meals are skipped, first one, then two. The children stop asking for food, knowing there isn't any. They lie listlessly by the fire, conserving energy they don't have for activities they can't do. You make the terrible calculations that winter demands. The seed grain sits in its sack, representing next year's harvest. But next year seems impossibly distant when your children are starving now. You measure it out grain by grain, knowing that eating tomorrow's crop means starving next winter too. But what good is seed grain if you're not alive to plant it? The weakest begin to die. Old Margaret goes first, found frozen in her hovel with grass stains around her mouth from her final, desperate meal. Then the baker's infant, too weak to cry anymore. The deaths mount as winter grinds on, bodies piling up because the ground is too frozen to dig graves. They'll be buried come spring, if anyone's left to bury them. Desperation drives innovation and horror. Tree bark is stripped and boiled into a bitter soup. Leather, from shoes, from belts, from anything, is boiled, until it softens enough to chew. You've heard of families eating clay mixed with water, just to feel something solid in their stomachs. Some survive it. Many don't. Their intestines blocked by the very thing meant to save them. The dogs disappear first, then the cats. No one speaks of it, but everyone knows. Pets become provisions when children are dying. You try not to think about what goes into your neighbor's suddenly rich-smelling pottage. You try not to notice when their dog stops barking. Survival makes hypocrites of everyone's morals. By late winter, you're a shadow of yourself. Your clothes hang loose on a frame that shows every bone. Your teeth are loosening, your hair falling out. Scurvy has set in from lack of vegetables. Despite the pitiful dried herbs you've been adding to pottage, your gums bleed constantly, leaving the taste of iron in your mouth. But you're alive, which is more than many can say. The children survive, on will alone. Their bodies have adapted to starvation in ways that break your heart. Distended bellies, stick-thin limbs, eyes to large and shrunken faces. They move slowly, carefully, preserving energy for the essential act of continuing to exist. Childhood has become a luxury none can afford. Spring approaches with agonizing slowness. The stored food is gone, the preserved meat a distant memory. You're eating anything now, boiled leather, tree bark, the last moldy turnips that even rats won't touch. Every day is a battle to find something, anything, that might provide enough energy to see another sunrise. The irony of plenty surrounds you even in deepest winter. The Lord's granaries are full. You help fill them. His cellars bulge with preserved foods. You help prepare them. His table never lacks for meat or bread or wine. But laws and walls and men with swords stand between his abundance and your starvation. You can see salvation, smell it sometimes when the wind is right, but you can't touch it. As the last days of winter drag on, you make peace with the possibility of death. Not acceptance, never that, but a grim acknowledgement that you've done all you can. You've preserved and stored and rationed and starved. You've watched your family fade and fought for every day of their survival. If spring comes too late, at least you'll die knowing you tried everything. But somehow, miraculously, the snow begins to melt. The first green shoots appear, and you fall to your knees to devour them raw. Nettles that sting your mouth are nectar. Dandelions are feast food. The earth awakens, and with it, the possibility of survival for another year. You made it through another winter, diminished but alive. The cost is written on your body, in lost teeth, in failing eyesight, in joints that ache with malnutrition. It's written on your children's stunted growth, on your wife's hollow cheeks, on the graves that will be dug when the ground thaws. This is food in medieval times, not sustenance, but survival. Not nourishment, but negotiation with death. Every meal is borrowed time, every bite a small victory against forces that conspire to starve you. You've learned to make the inedible edible, to find hope in horror, to continue when continuation seems impossible, The cycle will begin again. Spring planting with seed grain you nearly ate. Summer tending crops that mostly belong to others. Autumn preservation of things already half spoiled. And then winter again with its familiar hunger. This is your life, measured in meals missed and poisoning survived. In children who make it to spring, and those who don't. But for now, on this first warm day, with the taste of nettle soup fresh in your mouth and the promise of dandelions tomorrow, you're alive. Your family has survived another winter's famine. The Lord's feast continues in the castle above, unchanged and unchanging. Your hunger continues below, temporarily eased by spring's meager offerings. This is your world, where food is struggle, where eating is danger, where survival is the only victory that matters. You've endured another year in medieval times, where every meal is a battle and every day fed is a day one. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own hungers, its own desperate scramble for sustenance. But tonight, with spring's first greens, in your belly and your family sleeping around you, you allow yourself a moment of triumph. You've survived. Despite everything, the spoilage, the starvation, the sickness, the soul-crushing inequality of feast and famine, you've survived. In a world where food is death as often as life, that's miracle enough.